Hi everyone, I'm Yasmin Fehmi and welcome back to NJ PAC's 10 Newark Creators series where we're interviewing Newark-based artists, entrepreneurs, and health workers about their craft and how they're adapting to our changing world. And it is always hosted here on Instagram Live. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to be joined by JV, who's a bilingual sex educator based here in Newark. And we're going to bring her into the live stream now. Thank you for all the love already. This is so great. Hello, Newark Museum. All right, we'll just see if we can bring her into the live. Hello, Masakane. We're so happy to have you here with us. Hi, Gallery of Pharaoh.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, great. So I realized I wanted my smaller headphones because I was wearing the big ones before. And I was just screaming at my phone right now, like, oh crap.
It's
But I'm
great.
back.
Yeah, you look very compact now.
Nice. Yay. Small.
So we're so happy to have you. First of all, how was your day? What made you smile today?
Yes. So jokingly, I've been practicing these questions from before, and I was like, I can't tell people what made me smile today. But a story that I thought was kind of cute is I couldn't find my dog today, and I was worried. I always have them in like a different room if I'm doing something work-wise. But today I couldn't find them, and it's because they were so cold that they were in between a bunch of cushions and a new blanket that looks exactly like them. So I thought that was cute and like a sweet thing to happen today.
Oh, I love that. That's so sweet. Animals are the best, the greatest. We don't deserve them. um, so let's jump right in. You are a Newark native, and you grew up in Newark, and you're doing this very important work now. Can you talk to me kind of like broadly about your journey and how you got to sex education? And yeah, let's just take it from there.
Cool. Yes. So I love this question. I grew up in Newark my whole life. I'm a first generation person. My parents are from Ecuador. And yeah, I've lived in Newark forever. I've gone to school here. I haven't always had the opportunity to work here, but I have had really great work here as well. Um, and I became a sex educator. I was going to Essex County College, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. All the classes were not interesting enough, or I was not interested enough in me staying in them. So I was just in school and not ready. So there was a job fair, and one of the tables was of Masakane. And so I was so nervous because I didn't have great grades, but I applied online because I'd never heard about being a sex educator or talking about sex as work
Mm-hmm.
ever before in my life. I didn't know that it was an option. So after I applied and I got into this internship, I started learning about teaching sex ed. And then through this internship program, I went into different spaces throughout Newark and started doing sex ed at schools with young people and sometimes with adults at different organizations here.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell in love with it like immediately because it always feels like a little bit naughty because you're talking about sex, but it's also become my whole life. Everything to me is about sex ed, and I'm so humbled and honored to be still a part of it and to see it still happening, which is why Masakane is the organization that I feel closest to no matter where sex ed places me.
Mm. And you started as an intern, and now you're a board member. So I think you've been working with them almost a decade now, right?
Yeah, I'm going on like 11 plus years. This was something that sometimes college-aged people go to. But once I finished up my year as an intern, I was like, you can't get rid of me. I want to still do something. So even school then became about sex ed, and I learned how to do like research and about data collecting and things like that. So I offered that back to Masakane, and eventually the work that I found I felt most capable in and wanted to contribute to was the fundraising for Masakane.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So it sounds like it was really a very reciprocal relationship where you were growing them, but they were also growing you. Um, So talk to me about what Masakane offers to the community. What kind of resources and workshops and what can people go to them for?
Yes. So Masakane is a youth-led, sex-positive sex education organization. It's collectively every semester or so, folks will join us and they'll be trained as educators. So that means talking about social justice issues, sexuality, like anatomy, a lot of different topics. And then they'll go out into the community and offer workshops to partners like schools, shelters, parent groups, so many different places. So right now, what folks are doing in their internship program is making everything virtual. So by February 21, as in 21, in a few months, we should be able to launch virtually. Right now, we're kind of translating things, still trying to be available. In the past, we've distributed menstrual products and safer sex kits. So right now, because of the pandemic, the partnership has been with folks who are still distributing. But as far as Masakane, we are not distributing at the moment.
Okay, great. This is all great. So it sounds like your work was affected by the pandemic, and I think a lot of the folks that we've talked to in this interview series have had to pivot. What other ways have you pivoted? Do you have online workshops, or that's all launching in February?
Right. So we're working on the online workshops. Even in terms of fundraisers, we're really going to be online for a bit. But what's been interesting about the pandemic is all the things that come up that have to do with sexual health and having these important conversations. But also, because it's virtual, we now see it as something that is actually more accessible to people. So for people living with disability or just people who find it more convenient or available to be able to do it online, it's brought us actually a lot more interns this next come around.
Yeah, and I think you just opened your spring 2021 internship.
Yes.
So if someone's interested in that, what's the process for applying?
Yeah. So we have a website, and I actually just typed it into Google right before this, and another website came up that was not Masakane. So look for the one that says sex ed. And based off of Mita's interview, I wanted to make this a little bit interactive. So I'm on the website now. I don't know if you could see it. It's probably very, very
I
blue.
think if you tap your screen, it'll focus a little bit.
Mm-mm.
No? Okay.
That's okay. I just wanted folks to know that I'm reading out loud. So you're asking how to do it. You can actually apply on the website. And what I'm really excited about is that in this coming year, we're really going to be focusing on a lot of the social justice issues that we have, not just here, but in so many different communities, like immigration justice. We want to talk about environmental justice a lot more. Every time that folks want to intern with us, they talk about all these social justice issues that have come up, or rather are still relevant, but now highlighted throughout the pandemic. So that is part of it. You just apply online and you can be part of the board. You can do grant writing, you can do fundraising, you can learn to be an educator or apply in any way that you see fit.
That's awesome. Okay. And we'll make sure, I think Masakane is on right now, so we'll pin the website at the end of the interview. So guys, just hang out and we'll pull that up for you. So let's jump back to kind of the workshops that you've run. What are some of the misconceptions that you come across as it relates to sex ed most often?
I think, I'm not sure about misconceptions, but what I've appreciated in working with adults is that a lot of people may think they are adults or adults in general don't have conversations about sex ed, or that it's only something for very young people. So now where my work has taken me is that I do specifically adult education as my paid work, and I do it in English and Spanish. So misconceptions is a huge range. It's just like, have folks ever had this conversation with their families? Have they ever had this conversation at all? So it really ranges. It could be folks not knowing a lot about menstruation because it's never come up in their life. Or it could be just anything, having a conversation about bringing up what feels good to you or what feels good to a partner, and considering that that's something that you can talk about and that it actually is important to talk about how safe you feel, how comfortable you feel, a lot of different topics. I think that's every experience that I do a workshop is a learning opportunity for me because it's a conversation, and it wouldn't happen if the other person wasn't sharing back that they're surprised by something or that they're just contributing their perspective to it.
Yeah. So you've worked, I think, across the wards and downtown and the Ironbound and throughout Newark. Are there challenges around sexual education that are specific to Newark, or do you find that it kind of matches like the broader conversation?
I think it matches the broader conversation. I work with, like I mentioned, a program that also does Spanish speaking education. And so in Newark, I think about who is in the community. We have a lot of non-English speakers. I haven't seen a lot of programs that also work with adults in education. It's not something that's available in all of our schools, so that's pretty broad. But in terms of the community, just how available are these conversations? If it's not a part of school, then would someone be paid to come to a sex ed class? Or is it something that they have time to participate in because it's like leisure and it's something that they're doing for fun? So I think specifically, I think about that. I think about how many people are left out of the conversation of sex ed. I think a lot of it is biology. Be careful with pregnancy, or this is how infections work, and all that's important, sure, for lots of reasons. But I also am now, with experience, learning how many people are not in this conversation. So broadly speaking, folks living with disability are not a part of this conversation. Intersex people are not a part of this conversation. We don't have enough education on so many different experiences that people have, and all of us are sexual, whether it's with other people or in our own bodies. So yeah, I think communities like Newark, communities all over, those are the barriers that comes up.
Yeah. And how do you, I guess this is kind of a challenging question, and I'm not sure that you've answered it. I'm sort of like coming up with it right now, but what are your thoughts on how to bridge that gap? Does it mean that within sex ed there needs to be a more diverse representation of experiences, or is it more of a dialogue, or how do you think that works?
Yes. So I think that is, again, why Masakane as something that's constantly evolving. Even our mission statement has changed. We've put our heads together and been like, okay, what does this mean now to us? And now we really talk about Masakane as an organization that is anti-racist. And I'm reading also so I don't miss anything, since the computer's there. Pro-queer, pro-trans, and really are seeking to promote what sexual liberation means to a person. So to a person regardless of age, regardless of experience. And we want to include in that the right to pleasure, to have curiosity and conversations about pleasure, and that this is specifically for marginalized communities. So part of that is what other experiences are people having? What does it mean to have a conversation just about pregnancy prevention or infections? When people have real safety issues in their bodies based off of so much, based off of like so many different ways that people and things can be violent towards the body based on discrimination and marginalization. So I would love if it was sex ed available, just more available. Masakane is a way of getting people to become educators and help spread that out. I think it's important for us also to be able to talk about these things out loud to someone.
Yeah, I think that's not really I think an outlet that people have. I think we sort of understand with the pandemic, we kind of understand I have to preserve my physical health, and then we also understand the pandemic affects mental health, and there's a lot of resources being shared in those areas, but I think this is sort of often the forgotten world, and I wonder if that's something that you've noticed specifically in the pandemic is, are people able to focus on their sexual well-being, or are a lot of people facing challenges in that area?
Yeah. So I think that's a very big
The loaded
question.
question.
Yes, it's huge. I think it has a lot to do. The pandemic also is the pandemic, and a lot of people are starting to talk about infections. And I talk about sexually transmitted infections all day, every day. But now we're talking about being honest with other people, about contact that we've had with other people, if we've been tested, things that would have come up when talking about sexually transmitted infections. But also politically, the pandemic goes hand in hand with so many things, with housing crisis, with folks who have to go to work and expose themselves regardless, and then expose their bubble, their family. And just politically, also, folks have been talking a lot about access to birth control, or how during these elections, trans, queer, non-binary, non-gender conforming people were not mentioned at all as a part of these conversations. So if the pandemic affects sexuality, I would only say that, yeah, I think a lot of people may be struggling with pleasure, with so much to think about. And also, I would say that a conversation we don't talk about enough, like we talk about birth control and we talk about the right to choose abortion. We are also not talking about right now, or at least it seems like it's not focused on, people's access to healthcare. So gynecology is healthcare, chest exams are healthcare. All of those things also can become inaccessible in the days that we're living in. And they're so important to be accessible to people who can't afford it or people who don't have access.
Yeah, the kind of preventative care that prevents problems down the road. That's important. I think you shared this on your stories a few days ago, but it was sort of like a series of tips for having safe sex during the pandemic. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yes, so I feel like there's not enough, although I've been blown away by how much information, like I really love seeing infographics of things. I'm blown away by how quick they're happening with COVID. Like we're like, okay, we know 6 feet of distance, and we're now talking about like speaking really loudly and what that might mean even if you're wearing a mask, how long you're around people, thinking about other people who are immunocompromised. I think all of those, I can't say specifically because there's no like real heavy or solid guidelines, but just to have those honest conversations, which I hope is a part of our sexuality also. But now I also think about even with friendships, there's like talking about what are your boundaries, and do you need this to be a monogamous bubble, or are you going to communicate who you're seeing outside of the bubble as well, which is like a part of our sexuality as well. So I think that's all I have.
It's interesting that a lot of the skills that you're teaching as a part of sex education are kind of like transferable, just like open and honest communication, setting boundaries. Like these are all things that are also valuable outside of that sphere. So it's sort of like a holistic education in a way, which is really interesting. I was going to ask if you've been doing this a long time. Are there stories that come to mind where you felt like a really concrete sense that you were making a difference in someone's life, or that you had really shifted the way like partners work together or families work together with regards to sex education?
Yeah, I think a few things come up, and I had like one story in mind, which I'll do quickly, and then another one just came up for me. So one is that I was working with a Spanish-speaking group of adults, and this group, I think, hits me the hardest in a way, like where these conversations feel more impactful for me personally, only for the reason that I didn't have these conversations with my family growing up, and I always see my family when I see Spanish-speaking people, especially undocumented Spanish-speaking people. So one of the conversations I had after a workshop where I did just anatomy, I talked about the vagina, the vulva, the cervix, the penis, and I felt like that's a great start to have any kind of conversation. Someone had told me that they'd never talked about menstruation until 2 years after they started having their period, that they were living on a farm, and they were working on a farm, and then they went to the city and they'd been having their period, but no one ever talked about it until they got to working and a coworker talked to them about it. So it was in that I'm like, wow, I'm glad we get to have this conversation. And then every time I speak to a guardian group or someone who has young people, people who have young people in their lives, when we talk about consent, I find how important it is in these older people's reactions or comments that they share in talking about how much they want their young person to feel safe, to be taken care of, and how they didn't have those conversations or they never told anyone about the time that they experienced sexual violence. So I think those conversations are really impactful.
That's really powerful. And that really shifts. And that shifts not just, I think, that individual's life, but it also kind of has a snowball effect because it creates an atmosphere where they feel they can be more open. That kind of spreads throughout their community and their home. I think that's amazing. Do you have within Newark people that you partner with or mentors that you work with on a regular basis that you want to give credit to or shout out?
Yes, I think, well, Masakane has a lot of partners that we have been working with and likely will be working with, and hopefully more people are interested in sex ed or just joining Masakane in this effort to, like you said, have more of these conversations in community. But as far as any collaborations that I would love to see happen, I think like me personally, I have so many supportive, creative, amazing people in my life. And I would just love to see people in art and the doula community and so many people who have connections and care about this conversation or just about just interested in talking about sexuality, that there would be a collaboration in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or even like the people watching right now, just if this is something you care about, like look into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think most of the creators that we've spoken to work with different mediums where there's kind of like a natural intersection with the work that you do. So as far as your work, are there projects that you've had kind of brewing that the pandemic has put on hold, or any stretch goals that you're looking to work on either over the winter or next year?
Yes, capacity wise, there's a lot of projects I never want to say no to because everything feels so important at the same time. But we have a lot more folks coming into Masakane, and the big fundraising project for me always is going to be in how I improve it and who gets involved is evolving. But we want to pay our trans, queer, non-binary, Black, Indigenous, people of color who are local especially and coming to be educators. So the fundraising is for menstruation products, but also for safer sex kits. But the big thing in my heart, and I'm so excited that it has started, is getting our folks paid, knowing that an internship is not available for people to spend that extra time right now emotionally, but also financially. So that is a big thing. And then ideally, I'm involved in programs that do Spanish-speaking education, but I would love to see that in Newark. So that is the big stretch goal that I would really love to see come together.
And what would you say to someone who is kind of considering this work but hesitant? Maybe they're a lot like you when you kind of were roaming the tables and looking and considering. What would you say to someone who wants to get into it but has some hesitance or is nervous?
Don't believe that you have to get a master's. Like I don't have a master's, but I believed at one point the only way I could do this work was to continue going to school, but also pay for school and not get paid myself. So I would say don't believe that you have to go to school. If you want to, that's your decision. But with sexuality, I think we learn so much more outside of what is given to us in a textbook that also doesn't come from the experience of marginalized people. So if you are you and you have your experiences, maybe you can go about it a different way, like with Masakane as an option.
So we're kind of winding down now. So before we let you go, what's kind of, I've been asking folks this, like, what's one message that you want to impart to our viewers? Something hopeful and positive, hopefully.
Oh,
No pressure.
so no pressure on that. The positive thing, I think, is that is going to sound too impactful. I don't think anything is going to be different after we've had this experience of being closer to one another in some ways. And that's like with our maybe smaller bubbles, if we have that available. So I just hope that we can encourage each other to take care of ourselves and continue to take care of each other.
Well said. I love
Thanks.
it. And for folks who are interested in getting involved or staying in touch with either you or Masakane, or donating, where can they do that?
Yeah, so I want to say in the chat, I think we have information on how to contribute to Masakane. So that's the PayPal, Venmo. There's also a GoFundMe and the website. So website, you can see a different picture of me with different hair and maybe an outdated bio. And then on Instagram, I'm jvulva, which is, I guess it would be in the promos that we had. But those are the main ways.
Wonderful. All right. Well, this was so good. I'm so glad that we got to chat with you. You're doing really important work. I hope that you continue and that Masakane continues to grow. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. This is so great. Thank you all for being here.
Oh, and there's the website in the comments for anyone who's
great.
MasakaneCenter.org. So thank you everyone who tuned in. I think you probably all know that next week is our last week. Next Tuesday at 6 p.m., Kitab Rollins will be interviewing Sharonda Love Wheeler of Newark Pride. Be sure to tune in for that before the Thanksgiving break. And as always, follow us here on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to stay on top of everything NJPAC. I'm Yasmin Fahmy. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much, JV.
Good night. Bye.